The sun is gone, I have a light. The day is done, and I'm having fun. I think I'm done, maybe just happy. Think I'm just happy. Think I'm just happy.
You women, you have to surrender the marriage due. Okay. You do! What? If you're a Jehovah's Witness woman, you gotta give it up. And if you don't know what the marriage due is, first of all, you don't know what that is? Grow up. It is when your big, fat, elder husband gets home. He's a fat man with a mustache. And he tells you to lift your leg up in the air because he's gonna pound it and plug it. And your sisters are not supposed to, even if you're PMSing or bloating or I don't know what happens, but you are not supposed to refuse the marriage due. It is an admonition from it's scriptural. And it's a minor point though. It's just a marital detail. But I don't know if it's ever occurred to you that you're going to be married to this person for a very long time, as in trillions of years. And I'd also like to remind you that while it seems to be a minor sin to refuse your husband service in the system of things, in the New Order, even the tiniest sin results in instant vaporization. So if you love sex, then it's a great deal, but just something to chew on. If at any point during the next 100 trillion years you refuse sex to your husband, you will be you'll just vanish. You will be dematerialized like the angels, except you don't go anywhere. And so, I don't know. I guess that's kind of like someone else has complete control over your body. But that's my idea of paradise. I love having my body ravaged by a fat pig whose shirt and tie barely cover his stomach. Farts and wipes his ass. Vaporization appears also to be pretty big in the new system. Am I right? A lot of vaporizing going on. You go to any nice house you drove up to, or if you worked in an affluent territory, and knock on a door, person answers, usually a housewife, she's got her little outfit on, and she says, no, we're not interested. And they walk back to the car and sit there, and it never fails. Every time you get back in the car group, as soon as they close the doors, one of the person in the service group says, well, they weren't interested. They have their own paradise. The idea that if you have a big house, you're in paradise. And it got to be a catchphrase for Jehovah's Witnesses. Maybe it was clever at one time, but it got to be where even elders were using that slogan in service meetings. They'd hand a territory card of the nice end of town to someone, and they say, well, this isn't a very productive territory. Those people are living in their own paradise. The gated communities. And but it got to be where it wasn't even, it got to be where people got so carried away with that premise that you'd even just be going to middle class houses. And somebody would turn down the magazines, and then while you're walking away down the sidewalk, they say, I knew he wouldn't be interested. He has his own paradise. And be like, yeah, but it wasn't even that nice of a house. They're just middle class. It's not. But it is even when people weren't at home. There was, if you went to a big house and nobody was there, you leave something in the door and they say, well, they're probably not going to read it. They have their own paradise. Yes, I've heard it. They have their own paradise. But, friends, it got to where I always had difficulty with field service. I just, the concept of it. It wasn't that I wasn't good at field service, because I was very personable sometimes. But the pre-funct of it was, I didn't get. It didn't make sense to me. I'm thinking about, now say it's the early 80s, all right, and somebody gets Jehovah's Witness knock on their door, and then they turn them away. Okay, fast forward to the year 2034, and it's Armageddon. And this guy is retired now, and it's the angel of death. Oh, he opens the door, angel of death. It's Armageddon. And he raises his sword to strike this guy down. And the guy says, "What did I do? I'm just an old retired guy. I haven't done anything wrong." And the angel of death says, "Well, your Jehovah's Witnesses come to your door, and you told them you weren't interested. That was your chance at the truth, buddy. That was..." And the old retired guy says, What? That was back in like 1983. And he said, "Yes, but they offered you Watchtower magazine. You refused it." And the old guy says, "They didn't offer me Watchtower magazine. They tried to sell it to me. They wanted 50 cents. "Well, you should have paid them the 50 cents. "I didn't have 50 cents. I was poor back then." Well, angels know everything, and I know for a fact that you did have that 50 cents. "Well, yes, I had 50 cents, but I thought I thought it was a trick. There was just these guys showed up, and they had book bags, and I thought it was a hoax. They were just trying to get my money. I didn't know it was real." "Well, it was real. So, you should have taken it." I just wasn't good at film. I just wasn't. You have to have that beginning place you start from in order to go out in service. I just didn't have it. The poor family, everyone else in the congregation was embarrassed by them. Everything about them sucked. They wore shitty clothes. They were like the Waltons. They're like this family from like the 1940s. And they had a gaggle of haystack-haired kids, and nobody liked them. And they were officially part of the congregation, but they just didn't fit in there. And just one of those, your congregation probably had something similar. Just a poor family with a bazillion kids. And the patron of this family was a man who was not a Jehovah's Witness. Although he was not opposed to Jehovah's Witnesses, he just didn't ever get involved. But he had the adult children, the grandchildren, and the congregation was familiar with him. And he even showed up at meetings a time or two. This man, I guess he was around 60. He developed cancer. And because the family was poor, they didn't really have the money for all the, he was like a farmer. He didn't have health insurance. And he was on chemotherapy for a while. But I guess it was all just too much for him. And eventually he discontinued. And one day he opened a drawer and got out a gun. And he wrote a note to the family. And then he walked out behind the barn. And boom! He ended it. And because he was a worldly person, he, of course, did not receive a Kingdom Hall funeral, which it didn't really matter because he's not entitled to a resurrection. As you know, people who commit suicide will not receive resurrection into the new world. They are just gone. And they're never coming back. They're gone with the wind. And so there's really no point in giving them a funeral anyway. But the family did receive a ceremony of sorts. Not for the dead man. There's no point in that. But just to comfort the Jehovah's Witness family. And Jehovah's Witnesses don't call them wakes. They're just, I don't know. It was just a room where people walked through in a procession just to comfort them. And, but no funeral. even though the man was well known by Jehovah's Witnesses and they talked to him all the time, that his coffin was off limits to the Kingdom Hall. Just the way it is. It's Jehovah's rules. Be mad at him, not the rest of us. There was another death that later that same year that was sudden. And this man did receive a Kingdom Hall funeral because he was a ministerial servant, after all. He was, the family was from Ellsworth originally, but I think at this time they were living in Abilene, Kansas. And it was a man who was a servant in the congregation. He and his wife had 2 young adult daughters. And apparently, when the girls were teenagers, he began getting involved with them sexually. And I want you to understand, it's not that they were little children and he was touching them. Apparently, at some point when the girls were in high school, I mean, they were like 17 and 18, he started going into their bedrooms at night and just getting in bed with them and just nailing them. It wasn't that they were monkeying around. He just started having sex with his daughters, and they apparently were fine with it. They just went right along with it. And however, at this point, when one of the young daughters had gotten married, and shortly afterwards, I guess she had some sort of mental break because she just laid it all out. She just blew the lid off the whole thing that they had kept secret for a little while, and she just told everyone about her and her sister and what they had been doing with their father. And immediately following that, the father had an accident. And it was a tragedy for the circuit because, and they collected money for the family because the father of the breadwinner for the family had been in a hunting accident. And he had walked out into a field with a handgun, and he was wearing a suit.
The sun is gone, and I haven't lied. The day's done, and I'm having fun. I think I'm dumb, maybe just happy. Think I'm just happy. Think I'm just happy.
You women, you have to surrender the marriage due. Okay. You to this person for a very long time, as in trillions of years. And would also like to remind you that while it seems to be a minor sin to refuse your husband service in the system of things, in the New Order, even the tiniest sin results in instant vaporization. So, just if you love sex, then it's a great deal, but just something to chew on. If at any point during the next 100 trillion years you refuse sex to your husband, you will be you'll just vanish. You will be dematerialized, like the angels, except you don't go anywhere. And so do what? If you're a Jehovah's Witness woman, you gotta give it up. And if you don't know what the marriage due is, first of all, you don't know what that is? Grow up. It is when your big fat elder husband gets home. He's a fat man with a mustache, and he tells you to lift your leg up in the air because he's gonna pound it and plug it. And your sisters are not supposed to, even if you're PMSing or bloating or I don't know what happens, but you We're not supposed to refuse the marriage due. It is an admonition from it's scriptural. And it's a minor point, though. It's just a marital detail. But I don't know if it's ever occurred to you that you're going to be married